sex offender who made a fortune as a hedge fund manager in the 1980s and 90s, known for his lavish lifestyle and high-profile connections. Jeffrey Epstein is facing new allegations that he exploited dozens of young girls for sex.
Victims were given cash payments if they could bring other underage girls to be similarly abused. And that's how he continued to expand the number of new victims that he had.
It's the latest in a decades-old saga that's been held up as an example of how powerful, rich men avoid accountability. So, who is Jeffrey Epstein? The 66-year-old was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. In his early 20s, he taught physics and math at the Dalton School, an elite Manhattan prep school. Connections he made there got him a job at the investment bank firm Bear Stearns. He then went on to open his own finance firm in 1982. And that's where he amassed his fortune. His firm reportedly only accepted clients worth $1 billion or more. Epstein tried to lead a private life, but his work managing the money of the very wealthy got him into some very high-profile social circles. He became friendly with former President Bill Clinton and current President Donald Trump, also Britain's Prince Andrew. Epstein has 6 residences, including an entire private island in the Caribbean and this $56 million mansion. The 7-story house is one of the largest private residences in Manhattan. These recent charges include allegations he sexually abused underage girls from 2002 to 2005 inside his Manhattan and Palm Beach homes. When he faced similar allegations a decade ago, federal prosecutors in Florida struck a secret plea deal with Epstein. He avoided a possible life sentence in prison and spent 13 months in Palm Beach jail, where he was allowed to leave for work 6 days a week. That 2008 plea deal was negotiated in part by Trump's current labor secretary, Alexander Acosta, who was then the top federal prosecutor in Miami.
At that time, that you had a number of meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, who, when you met him 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution from minors. What did you know about him when you were meeting with him, as you've said yourself, in the hopes of raising money? It was reported that you continued to meet with him over several years, and that, in other words, a number of meetings. What did you do when you found out about his background?
Well, I've said I regretted having those dinners, and there's absolutely nothing new on that.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful.
Prince Andrew is trying desperately to thwart an eruption over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein that threatens to transcend the Duke of York and erode trust in the whole British family. Virginia Giuffre, who used to be called Virginia Roberts, said she was trafficked by Epstein and forced to have sex with the prince, beginning when she was a teenager. But Andrew has categorically denied the allegations. He's accused of being one of Epstein's shady customers. For such a wretched story, linking everyone from President Donald Trump to the Clintons to Prince Andrew, Giuffre claimed she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew on 3 occasions, including in 2001 when she was just 17 in London, then again in Epstein's New York mansion, and in the US Virgin Islands. The details were later struck from the record when a judge ruled they were unnecessary to the case. Prince Andrew said he had no recollection of this photo being taken, said to be snapped by Epstein himself in Maxwell's house, with his arm around teenage Giuffre.
Sometimes she's dead center in frame, living it up, but occasionally you catch her on the dark periphery of a photo. And those are the perplexing portraits that emerge of Ghislaine Maxwell. On one hand, the graceful socialite, and on the other, according to her accusers, a woman who lurked at the edge of high society, scouting and procuring young women to give to Jeffrey Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell has denied any allegations of wrongdoing brought against her. It's unclear when and how and why the Epstein and Maxwell partnership began, but cameras were catching them together at Mar-a-Lago parties as early as 1992. At that point, she'd only been in America for about a year, having fled tragedy and scandal in England. Her father, Robert Maxwell, a media and publishing tycoon who owned the Daily Mirror, disappeared off his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, in 1991. What happened to him is still a mystery. To add to the trauma, Robert was then accused of defrauding his employees' pension plan for some $600 million. The sudden loss of her father's support and her family's good name meant that the upper-crust Maxwell, who grew up in a 53-room mansion and attended Oxford, had to live a relatively modest lifestyle when she got back to New York. She even sold real estate for a while. But exactly what Epstein and Maxwell were is almost as unclear as when and how. It is clear that they dated for a few years, but according to The Guardian, things changed when Maxwell realized Epstein wasn't going to marry her. From there, the accusations are numerous. We start to see a pattern. Maxwell was allegedly in charge of recruitment. Accusers say she would trawl for young, often economically disadvantaged women and offer them a cushy job. It worked. Maxwell was elegant.
Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had a great way of normalizing the abuse that was going on. They kind of made it feel like we were in this really deranged family.
But as with everything in this story, even that was a facade. The alleged truth is uglier. If someone spurned his advances, or worse, dared to leave the Epstein slave ring, Ghislaine allegedly morphed into an enforcer. That included physical threats, according to alleged victim Maria Farmer.
She told me I needed to watch my back, that I know you like to go running on the West Side Highway, and that's not going to be a safe place for you anymore because there are a lot of ways to die on the West Side Highway.
And there are other accounts of just cruel punishment, like when a dazed and crying Swedish teenager turned up in Manhattan, alleging that Maxwell took her passport for refusing to have sex on Epstein's island. Other alleged victims corroborate this tactic. But it goes even further than retribution. Accusers graphically describe how Maxwell sometimes joined Epstein in sexual assaults.
Ghislaine started taking off her clothes. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going to happen if I said no. I didn't know what was going to happen if I screamed. I did what they said.
And there was little limit to the abuse. She allegedly trafficked women among her wider social circles too, allegedly including, notably, Prince Andrew. But maybe the worst thing that Ghislaine Maxwell is accused of is giving orders that other female lieutenants followed, that she created a playbook, that she helped industrialize sexual abuse of young women for Jeffrey Epstein. These girls, Maxwell allegedly told a friend in the 90s, are nothing. So when the initial crime spree ended with Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 guilty plea for soliciting prostitution, maybe it's no surprise that Ghislaine Maxwell appears to have just moved on, like it was nothing. This photo is dated just 3 months later. After Epstein goes to jail for those 13 months, she's never pictured with him again. Sources say she moved on. But it's obvious when you look at all those photos that she did maintain all those other connections that she and Epstein built. Connections to socialites, politicians, and the media. She even poked her head out of the crowd at Chelsea Clinton's wedding. The past allegations didn't seem to matter, even when some of the alleged victims subpoenaed Ghislaine in 2009 as she was leaving an event. But by 2012, you get the sense that both Epstein and Maxwell wanted to change their stories. He tried to rebrand himself as a philanthropist, and she founded the Terramar Project, an NGO that purported to work like a social media network for the ocean. For years, she had been elusive, moving between houses, but after the arrest, she was gone. It was a stunning trick for someone who now had a new level of notoriety. Newspapers speculated on her whereabouts. Was it out of friends in Manchester by the Sea, as neighbors claimed? So the internet went nuts when a photo outed her as she calmly read a book at a Los Angeles In-N-Out Burger of all places. But the picture itself was almost certainly misleading. The date is wrong, and there are signs everywhere that Maxwell's lawyer took it. See, it's not just theater. Her disappearance matters to alleged victims. If she can't be found, she can't be served, which means new civil cases filed against her can't proceed without extra effort and favorable rulings. And that's just one issue facing her accuser's quest for justice. There's also the bizarre and broad plea agreement that Epstein negotiated in 2008, which would seem to cover Maxwell. Although she's not named in it, it curiously offers immunity to any potential co-conspirators. The government has argued that it's only bound by that agreement in the state of Florida, leaving Epstein's other domiciles, especially New York, as possible venues for criminal action. But that will almost certainly be contested by Maxwell's lawyers. The agreement says United States. And in any court battle, Maxwell herself may prove a vicious opponent. The genteel socialite side may disappear. To counter a defamation suit brought by Virginia Jeffrey in 2016, Maxwell's legal team cited decades-old employment records and cheating on a high school boyfriend to paint her accuser as a liar. Plus, at least one legal expert says that proving Maxwell's knowledge of Epstein's activities may be harder than the allegations make it sound. It's her versus her accuser. Finally, there may be unexpected obstacles. Shortly before the release of this video, Maxwell's lawyers sought to delay a civil suit because of an ongoing criminal investigation into their client. But none of that, not her pedigree or her connections or even her disappearance, has silenced the multiple women who are now in active litigation against Maxwell.
Epstein, then in his 50s, was also suspected of organizing sex activities with underage girls at his homes in New York City, New Mexico, and on his private island in the Caribbean.
You're talking about hundreds of children all over the world.
Victims that were alleged sex slaves of Jeffrey Epstein, that they brought over from Eastern Bloc countries.
Flight logs from his plane and his address book read like a who's who of some of the richest and most famous and powerful people in the world. Celebrities, actors, philanthropists, academics, and world leaders.
It's really disappointing to look, as a lawyer, to look at this circumstance and say, how did this happen? One individual commits one abuse of a minor, in one instance of abuse of a minor, and they're held accountable for years and years through the criminal justice system. This individual abused hundreds of girls, and nothing happened. It's really, really unfortunate. We look at that and we say, how did the criminal justice system fail these girls in such a significant way? How has that happened?
There was ample physical evidence and witness testimony to support the girls' stories, including notepads seized from Epstein's home with their names and phone numbers, along with phone records. Despite the corroborating evidence, Palm Beach State Attorney Barry Krischer wanted to charge Epstein only with a misdemeanor.
And once that happened, it was clear to me that justice would not be served by the state attorney in the handling of the case, and we referred it to the FBI. And then there were many, many more victims after that time.
Epstein hired somebody that would impress the state attorney, Barry Krischer, to drop the investigation.
The U.S. Attorney's Office got involved with this case with Jeffrey Epstein's A-list of defense attorneys that are extremely well known and extremely powerful. I think these attorneys were able to manipulate the sitting U.S. attorney and the assistant U.S. attorney working the cases. A few things happened in this case that during my law enforcement career I've never seen before. The U.S. attorneys here had an indictment and they were sending it back and forth to Jeffrey's lawyers for changes. Never seen anything like that before.
Well, I started getting somewhat of an inclination that this is a situation where somehow, for some reason, the defendant and the government are working together against the victims, although that kind of conspiracy theory sounds so preposterous that I didn't want to believe it.
A subsequent FBI investigation found a sprawling network of victims and enough evidence to fill a 53-page indictment with federal sex crime charges. But Miami U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta signed off on a secret plea bargain, while deliberately not informing Epstein's victims. The deal granted Epstein and his accomplices immunity from federal prosecution. Epstein pleaded guilty in state court to 2 prostitution charges and served 13 months. Epstein's punishment was like that of no other sex offender in Florida. He had a private space in a vacant wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade, but records show he spent limited time there. He was allowed to go to his private West Palm Beach office, where he spent up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, often accepting visitors, including female friends.
What he ended up pleading to was a joke. The sentence he served was even a bigger joke, And then his probation was a slap in everybody's face.
The government, by that agreement, was definitely putting their name on something that they believed at that moment was ending the possibility of prosecution and ending the victim's rights. Right there, that's what the government believed.
Acosta, now President Trump's labor secretary, didn't explain why he sealed the details of Epstein's plea so that no one would know the scope of Epstein's crimes or who was involved.